Resident Evil 2.
1998. I'll never forget it. It was the year Resident Evil 2 dropped, and it changed my life, whether I like it or not. I remember playing with my cousin one day, and his brothers decided to boot up Resident Evil 2 on the PlayStation 1. I, out of curiosity, decided to watch to see what it was about. And I remember something that will never leave me ever in my life. It's the scene where Marvin turns into a zombie and attacks the player. That scene will never leave me ever. And in a way, Resident Evil has never let me go. Requiem is a game that honestly pays a lot of homage to a lot of previous games. Resident Evil 7 is prominent, Resident Evil 2 is prominent, Resident Evil 4 is also there. There is a lot of stuff in Requiem that just gets paid homage to. And honestly, I finished it not too long ago, and all I have to say is this game is great. There's nothing bad about the game. Everything worked well. I've been playing it on PC. I haven't had any bugs. I think Capcom has been working on trying to make sure that the PC side of gaming has been working well, and it kind of shows. Now, honestly, I'm not going to be downing on this game at all. This game is fantastic. But because we're reviewing it, let's get to it, shall we? Oh, jeez. So first off, let's just cut to the chase real quick. This game is like a 9 out of 10. This by far is probably the best Resident Evil game when it comes to horror, and the best Resident Evil game when it comes to action. Resident Evil 7 is heralded as the scariest Resident Evil game, even though I don't really find it that scary. But then again, what I find horrifying, not very many people find horrifying. So, you know, there is that articulate taste going into it. But also, this game just does what Resident Evil 4 Remake was doing better than Resident Evil 4 Remake. They just upped the ante with a lot of the hatchet gameplay, the new counter system with Leon being able to not only counter with the hatchet, but also with his gun is something that is really interesting. We also have a newcomer to this game, this title, and that's Grace. Grace is primarily the survival horror aspect of Resident Evil, and they're fantastic. I love going through the hospital, trying to do it as fast as possible, and just honestly just doing what Resident Evil does best, which is navigating a horrific setting filled with zombies, filled with enemies, and doing it in an efficient way. But alas, there are bad things in this game, which honestly, when you really look at it, they're not really bad. They're just, you could do a little bit better. And hopefully through updates and through DLC, hopefully there's some DLC coming for this game, we can get a better version of what this game is. So let's start with the first thing. There are certain points in this game where you play as either Grace or another character who I'm not going to name. I'm going to try and be as less spoilery as I can in this review. But again, spoilers are going to happen. Again, this is going to be a warning, but there are going to be spoilers later on. But there are certain sections of the game you cannot skip. Obviously, the very first section of the game is the Renwood Hotel, and I kind of wish you could skip this entire section. You don't really need to do this at all. In my eyes, it's just a setup for the initial sequence of what happens to Grace. But I really wish that you could just skip this. I wish there was an option to just skip this section of the game and get to either Leon's first section of the game or Grace's true section of the game, where it starts off with the horror of, the girl, the shadowy thing, ghost figure. But basically the girl, where she comes into play. I kind of wish they just did that. And obviously, there's another section I'm talking about with the orphanage. I kind of wish you could just skip it all entirely, because it's nothing more than just it's a very Sherry Resident Evil 2 remake kind of section where it's very boring after the first few times you play it. And I kind of wish you could just skip it. Now, here's one that I'm a little flabbergasted that it's not in the game already base, which is there's no New Game Plus, which, Resident Evil 4 is widely known for. And it's kind of weird that Resident Evil 5 also has that too. Now, Resident Evil 7, I don't remember exactly having that mechanic, and Resident Evil 8 does have this mechanic of New Game Plus. So I'm not exactly sure why this isn't in this type of game. I do know that Resident Evil, for the more horror aspect of it, they don't really have this, but Resident Evil 2 Remake does have, like bonus content when it comes to, inventory stuff. And also that, like, New Game Plus for Resident Evil 3 Remake has you being able to, have an inventory filled with things. So I kind of wish that New Game Plus, or at least Leon's section, allowed you to carry over a lot of your guns, your equipment that you have upgraded. And something that's a little nitpicky is when you put in credits for your guns, I kind of wish you would get it back when you sell it, which is weird that it doesn't actually work like that for this game, even though it works like that for every other Resident Evil 4 like game, which is weird. I don't know. I just thought that was kind of weird. No. But speaking of the guns, weirdly enough, this gun game for Leon's section, there's not a lot of variety to it. Something that I wish kind of was a little bit more wide, I guess, because, in Resident Evil 4, you had a whole bunch of different guns. You had wacky guns like the PRL 42, and you also had, the hand cannon, which basically the Requiem is, but with infinite ammo. You also had the Chicago typewriter, which had infinite ammo. You had the mine thrower. You had a whole bunch of shotguns to choose from. You had a whole bunch of handguns to choose from. You had a whole bunch of other guns to choose from. And with this game, there's not a lot of gun variety. I mean, there's a couple guns that I haven't really played around with, but it's because they're expensive and it's very hard to actually get to them because, well, guess what? You need to put in credits. And how do you get credits? Well, you have to kill enemies. Well, there's no enemies when you start the game and there's no carryover of your inventory, so it's kind of hard to actually try out new weapons when I need to get weapons that I need to specifically for a section of the story for Leon. So it's very weird that, both of these issues with New Game Plus and not so much gun variety, I kind of wish one would easily take care of the other, honestly. So I really wish that was able to be fixed in an update, having some New Game Plus. Now, one thing that I think is a little bit of a sin. Now, it's not exactly deplorable, but it is something that I think is a sin with so much action in this game to not have, and that's Mercenaries mode. With all of the guns that we have already in the game, with all the action that Leon can do, Mercenaries mode would kill in this game. I mean, this Mercenaries mode with this Leon would absolutely have so much hours of replayability just built in with it. And I think that's a little bit of a problem that it's not in here. Even Resident Evil 4 Remake took some time to get Mercenaries mode, but I do hope that if they do bring it in as DLC, that it is well fleshed out with new characters and new, abilities to do. I think that would easily transcend this game from not just a 9 for my eyes, but almost to a perfect 10 out of a 10. Now, you might be wondering, well, what is the last thing that, could bring this to a masterpiece? And that is a little bit of, well, you see, this is where we're going to get into spoilers here, okay? So I'm going to give you a little bit of time to stop the video and kind of just finish what you need to do for your game and come back. Okay, so here's my problem with this game right now. So there's one thing is the story, the other thing is within the story, I guess you could say. So the story is you play as Grace, then you switch to Leon's perspective, right? Now the pacing of that can be a little annoying, especially if you already know that you have to switch between them. That would be something that is one thing, right? However, one thing that was really annoying me is the length of each playable character. In the very first beginning of the game, you play as Grace for like maybe 10 to 15 minutes, right? Then you play as Leon for, a few minutes. Then you go and switch back to Grace, and then you do the section of the girl for about, however long you do it. It could be like a few minutes to, like 30 minutes to an hour. It depends, right? Then you go to Leon, and you play as Leon for maybe 10, 15 minutes again, doing, Leon stuff. Then you switch back to Grace. And then you play as Grace for hours on your very first playthrough because you don't know what you're doing. You're just trying to figure out what's going on, how to get around people, how to play the game. And this is where it really gets infuriating for me, is then you play as Leon again for only a short period of time. Then you go back to Grace for another long section of the game. Then you go back to Leon for a very short amount of time. And then you go back to Grace. You finish off Grace, and then you go to Leon. And then you get to play as Leon for a very long time. Up until you play the second half as Leon, that initial wanting to play as Leon can feel very aggravating to some people because, it's one thing to really want to play as Leon a lot, and then another thing to play as Grace, forcefully play as Grace, and then, suffering as Grace. So it can be, the pacing issue here is a little bit of, so that can be a little bit of a complaint. Now, here's the thing that I really, really do not understand. So the story goes that Leon is afflicted with this Raccoon City survivor disease, right? And in the story, Sherry also is afflicted with the same disease. Why is there no mention of Claire? Why is there no mention of Jill? Why is there no mention of Carlos, Ada? Hunk is kind of mentioned, I guess. And one thing that I really do not understand is how come they're not mentioned at all in the story. Chris gets mentioned at the very end because, of spoiler reasons. His team comes in to save Leon and Grace. But other than that, there's no real mention of anything. Of Claire, Jill, Carlos, Ada. There's no mention of them. Now again, DLC is a thing, and maybe they're cooking up something for DLC. I don't know. But honestly, I think besides these little nitpicky things, this game is great. This game offers so much to people. This game is really, really, really good when it comes to the combat. I don't think I've played any... Honestly, I think the only thing that comes close to this is Resident Evil 6, oddly enough. Now, if you guys don't understand, like, Resident Evil 6 had some loose combat stuff. You could do a lot of things for the combat in Resident Evil 6. It wasn't a good Resident Evil game by any means, but the combat was really interesting, I'll say. And Resident Evil Requiem does something that, honestly, nothing else has been done. Is, you know, the horror with Grace was so good. The actress of Grace, Angela Saint Albano, I think her name is. I'll have it on screen here. Her voice actress is so good with Grace. I mean, the voice acting in this entire game was good, but she just brought it up to a level which honestly is fantastic. Very, 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 very good performance by Angela here. And so really all I gotta say around is this game worth the tag? Honestly, I would say yes. This game is really worth $70. Now, obviously, some people might have some trouble with, you know, the amount of hours you have with the game because, you know, I beat this game in about 10 hours. That, I mean, can seem like a very short amount of time to people who think that, you know, a $70 game should be long, right? It should be like, you know, 20 hours or something like that. But Resident Evil games aren't long. None of them are that long, besides some of them, which I don't even want to mention them because they're really not that great. Resident Evil 6. The longest Resident Evil game that I think everyone enjoys the most is probably Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil 8, I think. Even Resident Evil 8 is not that long. I don't know which Resident Evil game is long at all. I mean, Resident Evil 2 Remake took me 8 hours to beat, and I was taking my sweet time with it. This game, I also took my time with it, and I still beat it in 10 hours. So maybe there's just something with it. I don't know. But this game is fantastic. This game is absolutely fantastic. And going to the RPD, going through the same route you take in Resident Evil 2 Remake is just... There was just something about that just... The memories and just something about that sequence was so well done that I don't know what to say, man. It was so good. Anyways, if you haven't played this game, I think you should play it. It is a great game. And even if you are someone who's not a fan of horror, trust me, there's something to enjoy in this game. And I think every gamer should at least try it. Anyways, what was your favorite part of this game? I know my favorite part was playing as Leon in Raccoon City, going through the RPD, but what was yours? What was your favorite part? What was your favorite part as Grace? I really enjoyed towards the end of it, but also the very beginning with the hospital sequence. My favorite section so far as Grace. So anyways, if you enjoy this, leave a like, leave a comment down below, and I'll see you in the next video. Later.